Pat Buchanan, legendary columnist, author of many best-selling books, and cable news pioneer. Mr. Buchanan, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and it actually is an honor, and I try not to say that too often, but definitely one of the legends in the fields where I make my living, so it is a pleasure to speak with you. We've never spoken before, so thank you for making the time.
Well, good to talk with you, Alex. You're very gracious. Appreciate it.
I try to be, and one thing, let's just start with that point, which is that I'm 31, but I'm actually a veteran of new media. I started with Breitbart about 9.5 years ago as the first employee, and I'm an obsessive listener of talk radio. I try to always be reading or listening to an audiobook, and one thing about you is, and it's very clear in this profile of you in Politico that I was savoring over the weekend. I don't know how you talked Politico into writing a decent piece about you, but you somehow did it, Mr. Buchanan. The ideas made it, but I didn't. Everyone should check that out. But one thing that you talk about is how you glean a lot of your lessons from history. You're really a historian. You got a new book coming out in just a month. Nixon's White House Wars is just your latest of many books. But you think of yourself as a historian, and that's what's informed your values over the years. And I have incredible fear that people on both sides of the aisle are not taking their history seriously. And I find it to be very dangerous. Your thoughts?
I have to agree with you, Alex. One thing that bothers me is really the lack of knowledge of history, not only going back into the history of the country, back to its foundings and what happened up in the 19th and 20th century, but you've talked to a number of folks, even good friends and a lot of political allies, young people, and they don't understand what you're referring to. And the examples you use, they know nothing about. And I think this depriving the America's young people of the knowledge of the history of their country and the political battles of left and right and everything going back into the 20th century and the 19th century, I think is a real injustice to American youth because they don't have the real ability to base what they're saying in examples in history. I mean, most of these battles we've seen before.
Yeah, that's precisely right. And so I want to ask you about this article in Politico, the headline in particular, that the ideas made it, but I didn't. It's in reference to the fact that so much of what Trump ran on as a candidate and much of what he's attempting to bring to his White House were ideas that you were really the first or the loudest person on the national stage to introduce some of them, and you did it at a time where they weren't as well received. I don't think there was a budding new media, conservative media, where these ideas could get their fair hearing in the public square. Reflect on seeing someone who's so closely aligned to you politically in the White House.
Well, I was astonished when Trump came down those stairs, and I wrote in June, I believe, of 2015, that Trump had picked up on these issues, a number of them, which really could carry him at least into the finals of the Republican run for the nomination, even though everyone was writing him off as a joke, and I guess the Huffington Post would put him on the entertainment page. But I said that these issues, which we had raised in the 1990s, mainly the results of quote, free trade, globalism, also of open borders, immigration, of failures to secure the borders, and also of the Bush 1, Bush 2 interventions and wars in the Middle East, that these were going to come back to haunt the United States of America. And the truth was, we raised those issues back in the 90s, and we said, this is what's going to happen. You're going to lose half of your manufacturing base in this country if you go along with NAFTA and GATT and MFN for China and these other trade policies, which basically were giveaways of American industry. And what Trump had going for him was he had the results of America having taken the wrong course on all of these issues. We left the borders unprotected. We enacted one after another of these trade deals to the benefit of communist China and Mexico and Japan and other countries. And, of course, we plunged into one after another of these wars in the Middle East, not looking at where we were going to wind up after we put our flag over the Capitol. So Trump had the benefit of the consequences of the United States having failed to take the right course in the 1990s under Bush 1 and Bill Clinton.
And so, and I want to get your overall take on the president's first 100 days, but on the point you just made, that my growing concern is that who has the presidency or inside the White House are not the populists and the nationalists and the conservatives that got him elected and will serve as his backbone should he seek re-election, which presumably he will, that it's actually Democrats and in particular globalists, people who haven't learned the same lessons that you've learned decades ago and that so many of Trump's base voters earned during the Bush and Obama years. And is that a concern for you?
Well, it certainly is. I do believe this, Alex. Once Trump won, he was the leader of the Republican Party. Now, there are many issues on which I remain a solid conservative Republican, as I've always been, on the Supreme Court, for example, on the slow growth of government rather than these big programs, on the belief in the private sector and the belief in cutting corporate tax rates and making America more competitive in the world. But at the same time, there are these new issues: securing America's borders, protecting the sovereignty of the United States. Stop, forfeiting our sovereignty and independence of action that was won for us back, 200 and some years ago. Stop forfeiting that to some new world order and globalist decision making. So on all these issues, I felt that you had a potential marriage here between the Republican base, the conservative base, and the new populist nationalist conservatives, and that these two forces together, if they stayed united, could get a tremendous amount done. We're not going to disagree. We're not going to agree on everything. And my concern has been that it hasn't really come off as smoothly as one would have hoped. And quite frankly, there's an awful lot of forces in this city of Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised, in this city that really want to cashier and dump the populist nationalist agenda. But excuse me, but that's the future of the world. You take a look at countries all over the world: populism, ethno-nationalism, economic nationalism, sovereignty concerns, identity concerns. These are what is moving mankind. And with all due respect, the European Union is yesterday.
And this is something Pat Buchanan, and again, that is Pat Buchanan, who's my guest. You could pick up some of his many books. Pre-order Nixon's White House Wars, The Battles That Made and Broke a President and Divided America Forever. That's available for pre-order now. You can go to Buchanan.org, read his many columns. But what you're describing, especially with the word nationalism, let me just ask you about the word nationalism, which has really been a curse word. It's been seen as a dirty word in the United States. We've been using it at Breitbart for the last couple of years, but it's something that still the uninitiated need it to be explained to them. Could you give us your concept of nationalism and what it truly means, not what the establishment media filter says it means?
Well, nationalism to me means that we're all of us are American citizens. Everyone here who has taken the oath of loyalty to the government and the nation of the United States. But in the world arena, it means that we look out first and foremost for the national interests of the United States of America. We are not acolytes of some ideology, some globalist ideology that dates back to Immanuel Kant and people like that, where we're going to create some new world order and we're going to fit into that and we're going to fit ourselves into that. That we are a country, a unique people with its own culture, with its own identity, with its own history, its own heroes, its own holidays, its own cuisine. We are a separate nation, a different nation from other nations. And looking out for this, we look out for basically what is our own national family first. This is why governments are formed. If you go back to Federalist II and read what John Jay wrote in there about us sharing various principles and histories and memories, that we are unique and we are separate. We're not just citizens of the world. I reject that. The nation state, I think, on this earth is about the highest or largest entity to which human beings can give true love and allegiance.
So, but these things are make you a racist and a xenophobe. At least they did when you said them
Among
20 or
other
30
things.
years ago. Right, right. And so, and 20 or 30 years ago, Pat, when you were saying these things, or maybe even before then, there weren't outlets like Breitbart and places like alternative media where you actually could fight back and you could voice that actually you could explain it to people in the terms that you did, where it actually you think, oh yeah, that isn't so bad, that maybe there is a point to that, maybe that is superior to these globalist one world alliances where you've unelected bureaucrats making decisions for people all over the world who ought not be making those decisions. But what was it like coming of age politically in a media climate where anytime you gave an opinion like that you were constantly charged with some sort of racist, sexist, xenophobe, Islamophobe, bigot, whatever, without really being able to defend yourself all that much?
Well, I think we defended ourselves fairly ably. We certainly got mussed up a bit, but in the '92 campaign, for example, I came off a Crossfire television show where I articulated my views then. And 1991, and 10 weeks before the New Hampshire primary, we closed a 65-point gap with the President of the United States to 15 points. And it was something of a sensation then. And in 1996, we won Alaska, then we won the Louisiana caucuses, came in second to Dole in Iowa, and won the New Hampshire primary. Now, so I think these were successful campaigns. They were not triumphal campaigns, obviously, but we were able to make our case through the national media. But if you go back to when it was really the dark ages, I mean, I was the author of the Agnew speeches. If you'll read my new book, Nixon's White House Wars, that Nixon undertook a counterattack on the media when they trashed his great silent majority speech in 1969. This, I think, if you're 31, was probably before you were born. But let me say this. That was a great battle back in 1969, but at the end of 1969, Richard Nixon was at 68% approval and 19% disapproval, and Spiro T. Agnew, whose speech in Des Moines just savaging the networks as unelected elites imposing their agenda on the nation, was the third most admired man in America. Now, if you stood up in those days and made these statements and said what you believed, you could find tremendous echoes out in America. And that is what some of the new media, conservative media, have discovered. They've been very successful. They've been created basically in recent years. I remember speaking with Mr. Murdoch about Fox when he was just starting it up. I mean, these were ideas that we had back in the 60s, was creating a conservative media and conservative institutions. And it was sort of the beginning. But look, it's not a bad thing to be out there, be out there on the lines in the earliest days of the cause, and then to see many of these ideas succeed.
Now, Pat Buchanan, you are known as a pessimist around Washington, someone who doesn't think necessarily this American experiment has a lot left to go before it starts winding down. And talk to us about the Trump election, the first 100 days of Trump, and your evaluation of the president so far. And does it make you more optimistic, or are you going back to being more pessimistic?
Well, I'm a historical pessimist in the sense that if you go back and look at the great arc of history in Western civilization, and you see its extraordinary accomplishments and the fact that the West once really ruled the world, and now the West itself is being colonized and invaded by folks from its former colonies who are changing the character of Western civilization and frankly, who disregard many of the traditions and things that we have built. It is hard to be an overall optimist, but in the terms of the shorter term, I was elated with Donald Trump's election because he ran on these issues, of preserving the nation, securing its borders, preserving its independence out of this new world order, getting out of all these third world wars and the rest of it, that I thought were really best for my country. I think he's making an effort, and there's been some stumbles, obviously, in the first early days, but I'm delighted that I voted the way I did, that I supported him and his causes, and I wish him well. And in the longer term, I mean, if you take a look at let's just take a look at the demographic change taking place in Europe. Europe, there's not, as I wrote in Death of the West almost 20 years ago, there's not a single European country that has a birth rate that is going to enable it to replace its native born. And that's especially true on the Mediterranean coast. And as these places empty out, you have new people who come from destitute countries across the Med and from the Middle East who are going to cross the Med into Europe. And I don't see the national will there to stop this invasion. I see a lot of blue sky talk about how wonderful it's going to be. But let's just say, I'm not optimistic. My late friend, Claire Booth Luce, once said, Alex, that there are two kinds of people in this world, the optimists and the pessimists. But the pessimists are better informed.
It's a great line. It's, again, Pat Buchanan. You've been very generous with your time, sir. You can go to Buchanan.org, pick up his book, Nixon's White House Wars, The Battle That Made and Broke a President and Divided America Forever. He's also a frequent columnist. You can catch a lot of his thinking. Pat, last question for you. There's one thing that I think you and I are both a part of, which I do think that free speech is under attack in a major way in the United States. These riots where conservative thought is not welcome on college campuses, and there does seem to be an encroaching fascism within the institutional left, and it is being enabled by the media in many instances. And I just wanted you to reflect on that for a second.
Sure. I think, frankly, it is not unexpected, and it's sort of predicted. I don't think the future is going to be very positive in terms of relations among Americans. I think, quite frankly, many Americans dislike and detest each other, and as I've written many times, and really regard the ideas of their opposites as neo-fascist and all the other names we've been called. And I think what has happened here is that an ideology, a political religion, Russell Kirk, has taken hold among America's elites, and especially among America's young, where they regard statements and expressions of traditional conservative values and beliefs as really intolerable. They're racist, they're sexist, they're homophobic. They shouldn't be tolerated because they're precursors of some sort of fascist future. Therefore, we have to stamp them out. And the way, say, folks in schools would not want people coming in and selling the ideas of that drugs are good for you and things, and that these ideas are evil, and we should have no compunction. Frankly, we should have moral certitude about erasing these ideas because we know the horrendous things they've resulted in. So they're doing this in quite good conscience. I think they're fanatics, but they're doing it in good conscience because they sincerely believe what they say about us. When they call us those names, what did Hillary call us? A basket of deplorables,
right.
Racists, sexists, homophobes, xenophobes, Islamophobes, bigots. That's what they think about us. And so I think you can expect, quite frankly, if people believe that about you and they don't want you to take power, and you've taken power and you're going to advance your ideas, then you behave the way they're behaving. So I think it is not unpredictable what is coming.
No, it's not, but it's good to see people like you vindicated, Pat Buchanan. Many of you know that his slogan when he ran for president in 1992 was America First. Well, how about that? It's something we're talking about quite frequently now in 2017. Good for you, sir. The ideas made it, but I didn't is the Politico profile. You'll want to Google that and check that out. We'll link to it at Breitbart.com later in the day. Mr. Buchanan, you're going to have to come back on the show. This was great.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. Have a great day.